We're really excited about the There you go. Thank you all for being with us today. We're really excited about the content and really excited to have you with us today. We know there's a lot going on, and so we appreciate you making time to hear from us and our panelists. So, what can you expect? First, we're going to let you know who you're going to be hearing from today and share a little bit about TNTP for those who aren't as familiar with our organization. Then I will provide a bit of context and framing around career pathways and why we believe it's important to ask the kinds of questions that ROI studies can help you answer. The bulk of our time will be spent in a discussion among two state leaders who are thinking about these questions. I'm really excited to hear from them, so I'm going to make every effort to be brief in my overview. Finally, we'll be sure to save some time at the end for the panelists to answer your questions. I'm going to ask that you use the Q&A button on this webinar on the Zoom so we can identify themes in the questions and maximize our time with the panelists. We definitely want to hear from you, so I encourage you to submit the questions as they come to you. My name is Eric Waters. I'm a director on TNTP's policy and advocacy team, and I'll be walking us through some of the what and the why we are thinking so much about ROI. When I'm finished with the context and framing, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Oliver, who is a vice president at TNTP. She focuses on education and career issues. She is going to moderate our panel of leaders, Ron Sandlin and Josh McGee. You already knew they'd be here from your registration, so we're going to invite them to introduce themselves when they get started. So we're the individuals you're going to hear from over the next hour, but who is TNTP? We are a nonprofit organization that believes all young people should be equipped to access multiple pathways to academic, economic, and social mobility so they can thrive in life, careers, and our democracy. The best way to describe how we do that is that we operate within a virtuous cycle. Our consulting work in districts and schools informs our research, which in turn informs our practice and our policy efforts. This continuous loop ensures a dynamic and interconnected approach to our work. On the policy side, it means our recommendations are informed directly by the work we do in schools and communities across the country. And we really do work across the country. In 2025, TNTP partnered with over 4,000 school districts of all sizes and contexts, spanning 32 different states. We were also grateful to work directly with state agencies or statewide partners in nearly half of the states. So why are we talking about ROI today? At TNCP, we believe in the potential for career-connected learning to create more pathways for students to economic and social mobility. We believe it helps them build connections between the education system and the workforce, and it helps states tackle labor market challenges throughout their regions. And as I'm sure you've noticed in your work, there's a growing interest across the country and significant bipartisan support for expanding pathways. This graphic shows the increase in the number of bills introduced in state legislatures related to career-connected learning over the past 3 years. There have been bills submitted in all 50 states, and over 160 have been signed into law over that span. Education to career is among the most frequently mentioned education issues in Governor's State of the State addresses every year. And just yesterday, there was a Senate Health Subcommittee hearing related to strengthening pathways. But at the same time, we know that not all pathways are created equal. In 2020, Excel and Ed found that just under 1 in 5 credentials being earned across their 30 straight sample were in demand by employers. Should also note that Excel and Ed recently updated their fantastic Pathways Matter site, which is a great resource for identifying and comparing key state education and workforce policies. At TNTP, we analyzed 2021-22 data from 30 states and found that to align the share of CTE concentrators with the share of good jobs in their state, more than 4 in 10 students in a typical state would need to concentrate in a different cluster. This slide shares some more detail on our findings. Specifically, the mismatch we saw between career cluster CTE students, what they're concentrating in, and the industries that are projected to have good jobs available over the next decade. For the purposes of our calculations, a concentrator is a student who took at least two courses in the same career cluster, and a good job is one which pays above a living wage for the state, and that is projected to have openings over the next 10 years. The blue column on the left lists the major career clusters in order from larger numbers of projected good jobs to ones with fewer numbers of good jobs. The green column on the right shows the average share of students concentrating in CTE courses in each cluster. So you can see there's a mismatch. Based on this graph in a typical state, the business, health science, architecture, and construction education clusters account for 50% of good job openings, but only 33% of CTE concentrators. Whereas on the flip side, the eight career clusters with the smallest percent of good jobs, which account for only 21% of them, features 50% of CTE concentrators. Our findings underscore the need for more and better data on the prospects offered by the career pathways that students are currently choosing. And we believe ROI could be a great piece of the puzzle leading to better alignment. So, we've invited Josh McGee from Arkansas, a state that published a comprehensive report on secondary CT pathways, and Ron Sandlin from Indiana, who has good data on post-secondary pathways and high school cohorts, and whose state legislature was one of the ones who passed a bill this past session that will require the department to issue a comprehensive ROI report for secondary CT concentrators. To hear from them, I'm going to pass the baton to my vice president, the incomparable Kim Oliver.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you and welcome, everyone. I'm so excited about today's conversation as we talk about how ROI is strengthening educational pathways and informing smarter policies, program design, and student supports. And we are very fortunate to be joined by two leaders who are working to translate complex data into actionable insights for their states. So I'm going to start off first by asking each of them to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their perspective that they're bringing to this conversation. And Ron, we can start with you.
Thanks so much, Kim, and thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit about the work in Indiana. And I'm always remiss if I don't say so. I'll take the privilege to share that I'm merely a spokesperson on behalf of several folks in this department who are just doing amazing work under the incredible leadership of our Secretary, Dr. Jenner, whose courage and a clear vision allows us and creates the space for us to do this amazing work. So thanks again for the space, Chief Innovation Officer of the Department of Education, where I currently oversee our high school redesign work, which is inextricably linked to the pathways work, our school accountability work, thinking about how we measure success and performance, school transformation and school redesign from a systemic standpoint, and then a handful of other kind of novel projects such as mastery-based and competency-based learning. So do it with a team of about 50 employees, and we all get after it every single day. And so excited to share a little bit of the work they're doing here. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Ron, so much. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity and for everybody that's showing up online to join in this conversation. I'm at the University of Arkansas in the Department of Education Reform, and I do a lot of work with the State Department of Education to help them use data to make better decisions. We work across a number of areas. Basically, wherever they say they need additional support on data and evidence, we jump in and try to help them. So we work on teacher workforce. We help them evaluate our education savings accounts, what we call education freedom accounts. And then we've also done some work around career and technical education, trying to link secondary education pathways to post-secondary outcomes, and look forward to having the conversation.
Okay, that's wonderful. And as a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature. It'll be the best way for us to be able to get to your questions. We will have some time in the end. So, gentlemen, I'm thinking we start with grounding ourselves in the why, right? So, how have you been thinking about what constitutes a return. And Josh, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and I think it's a question that often people skip over. So I really appreciate that you guys are thinking about kind of definitional, foundational elements here. So often, I think people, whenever they think about return, they jump immediately to wages. And they think, dollar in one side and dollar out the other. I think that's one way to do it. And so you can think, but at the end of the day, ROI, return is all about how much you put in and how much you're getting out. So it's outcome per unit of input. So that can be in dollars, that can be whatever you want. And so that broadens the concept of return on investment. I think the important concept is the things that we're doing take a different set of resources, right? And so, in the academic world, often we're evaluating, okay, what outcomes did we get? And sometimes we find positive results, sometimes we don't. But when we find those positive results, we don't often think about, okay, how much do we have to put in to get that result? And from a state perspective, Ron knows this better than anybody. Budget matters, and how much you have to put in one side to get the result out the other matters a lot. And so when we're thinking about defining return, it's all about outcome per unit of input. We can define that broadly, but it's really important to think through the cost relative to the benefit to know whether it's something that you can scale and whether it's worth it.
Yeah. Ron, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Josh is saying. I really appreciate the different perspectives on the call, very in proximity to the same work. But Josh in the higher education space obviously has the researcher background, me in the state government space, the policy background, and there's just different influencers. And Josh elevated a really important one. How much it costs or what the inputs are, what the investment is to reach the outcome or the output of the return is a critical consideration and oftentimes missed. And that I would add to say, I think that's a conversation that we want to have more of. Is yes, the return, we're thinking about it through the lens of social mobility, through the lens of employment and enrollment years after high school, not surprising. But the one thing I hope folks will take is we really need to get clear about what the investment is as well. This is a very complex social system. And in state policy and small p politics, there's this desire to justify certain very specific and narrow decisions. And so, one example in Indiana is a national model around career scholarship accounts. $5,000 for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders in lieu of traditional CTE, right? To basically participate in a more workforce driven career pathway that might not check all the Perkins boxes of a CTE pathway, but tries to develop the same skills, right? So different means, same ends. And Josh, you said something really great on the call the other day is just looking at that program and determining whether or not it worked is not about a $5,000 investment. We have to look at who is enrolling in the program, right? And we have to make sure that we look at how much it costs the state to stand the program up and maintain the program because it's an entire new infrastructure. And so sometimes I think from a state's perspective, we get stuck on a return and it becomes our little golden nugget in a system that I would say is about as dynamic as the periodic table. And we lose the fact that this thing is incredibly complex. So I'll answer your question: returns, social mobility, and employment and enrollment. But on the investment side, I think is a really important conversation to have there. And one last point that I'll mention is I'm just so glad we're having these conversations because for about 2.5 decades, we've just allowed ourselves to assume that the standardized universal liberal arts education, college prep for all, there was a built-in return on investment. And I think we're realizing now that we missed the boat when we're looking at more than $1 trillion in student loan debt and not the returns on outcomes that we would have expected, meaning college completions. And so just having this conversation and not being complacent about these pathway conversations that are taking place are super critical. And so thank you for elevating the issue.
Ron, I love that you said that. Like we're having we're having the conversation and we're not going to just make assumptions about what pathways truly are the best returns, just not even just for the young person, but for our communities and our states and society as a whole. So we know that there's challenges, right? This is a complex issue, and that's part of it. So, Ron, sticking with you, but ask the question to both of you. What are some of the, if there are, methodological challenges to conducting the studies or barriers to connecting all this data coming from K-12, higher ed, workforce? And if how have you been able to overcome some of them?
Yeah, the overcome, I reacted to at the end. I think overcome is a process. And I think our goal is not necessarily to overcome, but to build belief in people in whatever they're willing to believe in about the data that we're doing, because they're about the data that we're analyzing, because there are limitations. Some people are going to buy completely in, and other people are just going to buy in part way. But we need to find a way to engage every single player in this system to buy in at some level to the work that we're doing. And a couple of the challenges that contribute to that are the influences that extend beyond our measurables, right? And so measuring how well a student is performing 3 years after high school after they completed a pathway, and we have a big push on completing the credential by the end of high school. So a lot of these students won't have to go to post-secondary because they will have the post-secondary credential by the end of 12th grade. And people have a lot of questions about what happens in year, right, 13, 14, and 15 before you check back in on them that I don't have control over. And I'm not sure we overcome that, right? And our goal isn't to overcome that. Our goal is to create avenues for people to engage in the story that we're telling at the level that they can engage. So that's number one. And number two is data quality. A lot of this relies on data in from a disparate group of people. And I'll give one example, our school corporations. We have collected a numbing amount of data from our school corporations and done nothing with it. And I'm talking as a country, right? Look at the federal government, right, to begin with. And Josh, I know you love being able to get a hold of the federal data, but our schools don't really see the return on all the work that they do to submit those data. And so that's a reality. So as we start this work, I strongly recommend, in order to help overcome or build buy-in, is put the data out first, right? So put the credit completion data out and let people react to it and say, well, that's wrong. And they're like, well, okay, well, you gave it to us. So before we start making decisions about the return on the investment, let's make sure that our data that's trying to quantify and capture the investment that we're measuring, that the data is accurate. And so we did that with our Indiana GPS dashboard. We just posted a bunch of data and learned very quickly that it was not good, right? And then so have since been building buy-in and overcoming, right, to the extent we can, data quality issues, so that when we start really digging into that return, people trust that we've effectively captured and valued the investment.
I love the transparency of that, of saying this is the data we've collected. Let's take the risk. Let's do that. And like you said, building that trust, talking about that data quality. I mean, Josh, was a lot, right? And I know you deal with data all the time in terms of research. So same question to you. What have been some of the challenges, barriers, and what do you think about overcoming them?
Yeah, I would start by just plus oneing Ron's point there on data and, frankly, the research community, people like me. Often we do a bunch of stuff that bounces around in our universe, but doesn't make it to the people actually doing the work. And that's a problem. And we need to fix that. So I applaud efforts to get data in the hands of policymakers and practitioners and the public, regardless of whether, they have the capacity to use it. Find ways to communicate information that you think is important, and let the end user figure out the best way to use it. And Ron's exactly right. Data that gets used improves in quality. So that you can't just collect data and expect it to be great. It needs to be used. If it's not used, if it never makes it to the people on the front line, you're going to never know that there are problems. So back to your question. So I love that. Thanks, Ron, for bringing it up. So back to your questions. I think there are a few challenges, barriers here. One is just getting good at measuring both the input side and the outcome side. We often don't have great measures there. Like figuring out what resources went into different pathways is challenging given the data systems and the way we collect finance and resource allocation right now. And so if we're going to get serious about calculating ROI, we need to do a better job of collecting and disseminating data in a way that we can actually better attach it to programs and pathways and things like that. Or we're just never going to get to a place where we can really get to ROI. Same thing on the outcomes. More and more state data systems are connecting K-12 data to workforce outcomes, but it's still relatively rare, and only certain groups have access to those data. And those data often aren't making it to school leaders, policymakers, or parents. And so we need to do a much better job measuring those longer term outcomes and publicizing those, making them user friendly. So I think measurement is one. I think that isolating the actual contribution of various programs is another. So if we just kind of summarize the outcomes that various programs get, some of the outcome was caused by the program, and some of the outcome was caused by the type of student that chose that program. Oftentimes, like think an engineering pathway, like those students who are going to choose a pre-engineering pathway are going to be all right. Like they could probably go into a lot of different things and be okay in the workforce. They've got skills, they've got both hard and soft skills that would make them successful. What we really want to know is the contribution of the program to their workforce outcome. And that's just a more challenging measurement issue where you probably need to bring in some researchers to help you develop a model that controls for, say, prior test scores of students going into those pathways so that you create kind of an even playing field for pathways based on who chooses to go into them. So that's two. I think we also, once we start measuring ROI, it's great to wait on workforce outcomes, but those things take a while to materialize, right? And schools are trying to educate kids and get them on the right path today. And they can't wait around for until the kid is 26 to know, oh, well, they should have been in another pathway. And so another thing that we've got to do a better job of is not just publicizing the long-term outcomes, but thinking about, okay, what are those intermediate outcome measures that we can actually manage to in the interim? So doing the work to connect those. And then finally, I think we've got to grapple with return to who. Are we talking about return to the state? Are we talking about return to the local community? Are we talking about return to the kid going through the pathway? And all of those calculations and determinations might be different, right? And I think that all of them are valuable, and we might want to publicize data trying to capture a variety of kind of return measures based on who is getting the return.
That's fabulous. I think you said so much about access, the type of student that's actually choosing the pathway. What does that mean in the various elements of how you're collecting the data? Ron, I saw you nodding your head a lot, so I want to give you a chance to respond if you like.
Well, I just wanted to add on something Josh said about when you get into the nuance and thinking about controls, right? And really not being lazy with analyses. Post-secondary partners are critical. Professional researchers are critical. And I know nationwide, there's this perception, real or not, whatever, doesn't matter to me if you that there's an attack on that. And I want the folks on this call to hear that in the state of Indiana, right, which, if every state gets a color, you know what color we get. Our state agency is 100% committed to partnerships with professional researchers to evaluate, not just from the policy, like let's answer the question, did this legislator's idea work? Because we get those pressures, right? But from a substantive standpoint that really provides the hard truth, controlled for all the things that Josh talked about and more. And so I think working in our laboratories of democracy, right, our states, the conversations, at least in Indiana, and what I hear from my colleagues, is a renewed commitment to these partnerships with higher ed and professional research partners. And that gives me strength, and I share it with folks as somebody who's on the inside, if they've struggled with that over the past couple of years because of, for whatever reason, that we are committed in Indiana, and there are a lot of other states who share that commitment.
So Ron, let's stay with you because I love what you said. You said hard truth. So let's talk about and shift a little bit to findings. So what do results reveal about your pathway programs or degrees? Anything surprising, counterintuitive? Share it.
Yeah, so in Indiana, we are just on the front end of what I would call a pretty significant and potentially well, it's going to be transformational one way or the other bet around our high school diplomas. Um, and we are basically letting go and trading the traditional liberal arts college for all set of courses um, for some students for experiences and credentials. And so, quick example, Algebra 2 is no longer required to graduate in Indiana, and neither is geometry. If your jaw just hit the floor, right, um, you have to understand that our bet is that those students can be equally beneficial. They still have to take math. They still have to take 6 credits of math, but those students are going to benefit from mathematics experiences connected to their pathway. But we have to replace that with meaningful work-based learning, meaningful credentials connected to real opportunities, not just student interest. And so let me tell you about one of the most concerning data trends right now in our initial or past returns, and we need to change in order to make sure that this bet pays off for kids, Josh, right, for the whom, is that manufacturing as a CTE cluster, so multiple pathways, is the 13th most popular pathway out of 16, or excuse me, 13th most popular cluster in Indiana out of 16. If you don't go to college and you don't go into healthcare, your next best bet of getting a job, a good job in the state of Indiana, is in advanced manufacturing. And it is 13th out of 16 clusters. And those are the types of things that we have to address, because if our high schools, I saw a question about how do we help students select credentials, such an important question, because our high schools are also battling the student's interests. What's going to engage the student? And a lot of times it's culinary or cosmetology, right? Or industries that are cool, but that don't exist at scale in Indiana. And so, how do we make sure that information is communicated to students through career coaching? So, initial results on this new bet, too early to tell. But we have some work to do in the career coaching space to make sure that by the time they get there, going to Josh's point, what are those leading indicators so we don't find out when they're 26 that wasn't the right bet. We have some work to do, and that's one that's really concerning is our alignment between that you showed earlier. You showed the data, student selection and concentrator completion, and actual workforce opportunities.
That's great, Ron. I mean, here in Connecticut, I'm in Connecticut, same thing, advanced manufacturing. So, Josh, let's bring you in. I mean, we're talking about what do we potentially have to trade, right? For some students, how we're connecting to experience and credentials, et cetera. Have you seen anything that's surprising in terms of the results from your programs or degrees and some of the other data that you're collecting?
Yeah, here in Arkansas, our data largely match what Eric presented earlier and what Ron has said. We have a mismatch between our H3 pathways and what students are choosing to go into. And when we looked at it, a lot of that is driven by offerings. And there's some path dependence in what schools offer. So, in Arkansas, CTE largely grew up around kind of ag programming. And so we've got a whole lot of people ag and kind of old school home ec style programming. And so we've got a whole lot of that programming that still exists that has just been maintained in schools because that's the way we have done it for a very long time. And those pathways tend to be pathways that students pick up. More recently, we've seen kind of generalized business pathways crop up, which is not H3, which teach you how to use Excel and that type of thing is almost too generalized to connect to real world work experience. So I think our report kind of mirrored what the rest of the nation is seeing. Because of that, the State Department has worked on revitalizing the CTE programming, so shrinking the number of clusters that we have and the pathways that we have, trying to refocus schools on placing students in those H3 pathways. With our recent legislation called Access, we're also trying to accelerate student learning across all ability levels. So we're trying to get advanced course taking, whether that be advanced on a college track or advanced on a career track. We're trying to get kids into those advanced course taking pathways that if you're on the career track that lead to a credential or lead to credits towards a credential while you're in high school. We've also implemented something we're calling diplomas with merit and distinction, which includes, IB and AP scholars, but also includes kind of H2 pathways in CTE. So there are multiple ways to get those diplomas with merit and distinction. So we're no longer just holding up those kids who go down that college route, but we're holding up kids who achieve something great while they're in secondary, but are on a career pathway. So I think because of our work, we've kind of engaged in a multi-prong redesign that includes simplification, includes better guidance for students, and then includes acceleration for students across different pathways.
This is an amazing conversation because you talked a lot about the offerings and access and about this better guidance because when students are making those selections, and obviously the folks that care about them, their families, helping them to make those selections. So I want to stay with you, Josh, because we also said who are these ROI reports and analyses for? We said it a little earlier. So let's talk about communication and the best way to communicate findings. How are you deciding that? What are you're thinking about? I heard you already say some of the redesign for the students, and as you're thinking about all of this, like who is the audience?
I think that's a wonderful question, and I'm not going to have a complete answer to it. I think that so many states are just trying to figure this out, right? So I talk about our redesign and providing better guidance, and yet we don't have the capability to, if a student is coming into a guidance counselor, is trying to choose courses, is thinking about a variety of pathways, we don't yet have the ability to put information in front of them about, careers and what they might expect on the employment side in Arkansas more broadly in the US, what they might expect on the wages. I'm not even sure our counselors are well equipped to tell them, like, okay, well, here's what you would need to do to get to a place where you are prepared to apply for that job that you want. So I think this is a great opportunity. It's kind of a greenfield area. I think, first and foremost, the primary audience has got to be parents and kids. I think we've got to provide better information to the people actually making the choices and provide better motivation for them to be engaged and have agency in their education. I think we're seeing a spike in chronic absenteeism, and I think a challenge with that is a challenge that is exacerbating that problem is that parents and kids don't necessarily see school as integral to their life success. And we haven't made enough of a case there. And this ROI stuff, providing better information about why they should engage in school and why they should choose a certain pathway and why they should have agency and choose to pursue that because of life success might help them see the value in school and get us around some of the challenges we're seeing. So I think it's got to be parents and families. I think we've also got to do a better job, of course, communicating this information to school leaders to help them choose which offerings they're going to provide in their schools. There's going to be a trade-off here, right? Schools cannot provide every pathway. They just simply can't. And so providing better information, and some of that's got to be kind of localized labor market information, right? You've got a lot of the kids going through our schools in certain parts of my state, I suspect this is true of others, aren't going to go far whenever they go to do post-secondary or career. And so providing kind of localized labor market information is very useful to them. And then policymakers, we've got to provide better information to them to help them understand what they're getting for their dollar. There's a lot of frustration now in state legislatures that they put more and more money in and they're not sure what they're getting out the other side. I believe in the value of education, but I think we've undermined that by not providing great information, and all they see is test scores are flat or declining. and parents are upset with their educational options. And so we just need to do a better job of communicating the value of education and give them more confidence that their dollars are achieving outcomes.
So communicating that value to multiple audiences. Ron, I'm coming to you. Advanced manufacturing is 13 out of 16. As you think about this communicating your findings piece, how do we get advanced manufacturing opportunities to more kids?
Yeah, I think it starts with not indicting the fact that that is the truth. And I think that's where we miss on a lot of this work is in our ivory towers in Indiana, they're limestone. If you're not familiar, a history lesson, a big chunk of the Washington Monument, I believe, is Indiana limestone, if I'm not mistaken, or something important out there. Um, th- we're so quick to say, how could this be? Right? That is the best effort of the folks that are in our schools working with kids day in and day out. Somebody mentioned, is it interest or is it coaching? Is it both? Right? It's so complex. It's not one thing or the other, but I'll tell you this, what it's not. It's not nefarious intent, right? And so we have to make sure that as we communicate our findings, we're doing it in a way that respects the folks that are trying their best. Because I will tell you this right now, there are 6 people on my team leading this work. It ain't enough to do it, right? So we need these folks on the ground. So it's about meeting them where they are and disappointing them at a rate that they can withstand. I recently just said at a convening on career coaching, when you had your last career fair, how many of you consulted the list of top jobs in your region before sending out invites, or did you just blast out invites to any employees in the community? You can imagine that turned into a rhetorical question very quickly as everybody got quiet. And I was like, oh, that probably came off a little harsh. And somebody was courageous enough to say, hey, we've aligned our invites with the pathways our schools offer. Should we stop doing that and switch to this, and pivot? Because our career fair is next week. Absolutely not. You have created an intentional alignment based on your context. Now, let's have a conversation about connecting the CTE programs you offer to the opportunities in your region, right? And let's talk about why those are being offered. As Josh mentioned, somebody in the comments, is it a legacy program, right? Who do we need to facilitate loss with in order to make progress, right? And because these folks are in control and they have all the power, and if we come and indict them and we don't help them facilitate their loss of everything that is their identity, the thing that they've been teaching for 30 years and have great stories to tell, then they're just going to close their doors and keep doing the same thing they've always been doing. And I think as state policymakers, we oftentimes want to turn it around tomorrow. And so we get lazy with our language around data and we unintentionally indict the people who we unequivocally rely on.
Ron, you're doing a great job of allowing us to shift to action and forward thinking. And you talked a lot there, including about the staff, and I love that. Yeah, let's not indict folks. Let's work on improving the system. So, in that vein, if you could upgrade one aspect of your state's data infrastructure to strengthen the ability to do future ROI analysis and even better outcomes for our young people in general, what would it be?
Yeah, and I think there's probably a myriad, but I did pick one. And that would be our ability to track students who leave our state or enroll in non-public institutions. Currently, our state longitudinal data system, which is said to me as one of the best in the country. I'm not bragging, other people are saying it. And yet we still have the same outcome in our longitudinal data for a student who leaves the state and gets a good job and a student who stays in the state and doesn't. They are both in the denominator and not in the numerator, and we have no way to distinguish between the two. And so this is when you go back, how do you help people overcome? I'm not going to help people overcome that in Madison, Indiana on the Ohio River, who are closer to an economic hub in Ohio and Kentucky than they are in Indiana. Right? So we have to come alongside the folks in Madison and say, okay, what does your longitudinal data tell you? Because you've always been a border city, right? So what is your data? Let's look at your data over time and maybe not say, what is your data overall at this time? And that's one thing that I would love to change is how can we get those data for outcomes of students who either enroll, same with students who enroll in a non-public. They're in the denominator, not in the numerator, college. So if we could get those two data points, that would be awesome.
Josh, I'm coming to you for this question. I got to think it's been percolating in your mind. What is one thing that you would either upgrade or strengthen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to give what may seem like a somewhat non-answer on the specifics of that question. So I think too often whenever we think about, okay, we need to measure ROI, so that's a data problem. So let's go and do work on the data problem, right? And we start there. And often we get overly focused on solving the data problem without any kind of clear, high value goal in mind. We've got some vague goal of it'll help us measure outcomes, and but nobody's really asking for that, and we don't have something concrete we're going after, and so it gets just bogged down in the tech people and lawyers talking about the data, and then it stalls out, and we don't get much of anywhere. So, what I think we should really do is create a clear vision of where we want to go and start doing stuff. And we need policymakers and school leaders and parents to be aligned to say, we need this stuff. I mean, to Ron's earlier point, we just need to start getting things out and getting information used. Like, if we don't have the perfect data right now, let's get some stuff out there and start the conversation. And then if it's valuable, people will want more of it. So I guess my big thing is let's not be stalled to get the perfect data right now and start working on the data problem. Don't start there. Start on the stuff that's valuable to people and start producing it. And that's going to take collaboration between higher ed and government and school leaders. And it's going to take a conversation with policymakers and parents about what's valuable. But start there. If you can add value there, this thing will take on a life of its own and have momentum, and you'll end up in the place you want to be on the data side.
So, Josh, sticking with you, you said, what is valuable? Let's have a clear vision. What are some other big questions that you think need to be answered? They remain unanswered right now that you think needs to be addressed in order to do this work well.
Well, I think, at a base level, just publishing information on descriptively on the outcomes that kids are achieving going through various pathways is great. I think another thing that we don't know much about is, if people go through certain pathways, like what's their next step? Pathway fidelity is the way I talk about that. Do they go into something that's aligned with the pathway that they started on or not? So kind of thinking through that, providing better information to parents and families about what it takes to get some of these jobs, like what's the next step. So you start on this pathway, but what's the next step? I think is great. And then, I think there's pathways are fantastic, and we're talking at a high level about pathways. But I think there's still a whole lot of development work that needs to be done to figure out really what works within a pathway, and also to allow students to explore across pathways more flexibly than they can right now. So it's hard for me. I like CTE pathways, and I think it's great to think about, giving kids experience with career pathways. I think it could be harmful to shoehorn them in or, put them in a pathway from the start. And then it's like, okay, well, you're in that pathway. And then they think, oh, maybe I want to do that other thing. No, you've already taken a course or two courses in this pathway. And there's no way you just spent a semester doing that. Like, you're not going to be, you can't be a concentrator now. If you want to switch, you don't have enough time. One challenge we have is that kids they may know what their parents do, and probably don't know that much about it, but they don't know really anything about any other profession. So how are you going to ask them to choose a pathway right now? We need to give them more and better experiences faster, and then allow them to specialize later on.
So exploring that flexibility, but also what is their next step? And I feel like Ron, that teed you up. So to you, what are some of those other big questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to capture a little bit from a state policy perspective on what Josh is sharing because there was also a question in the chat about concerns about access, equal access regardless of background. And what Josh just described is largely an artifact of our very, very prescribed high school experience, right? In Indiana, a CTE concentrator is 6 credits. That's 3 courses. A CTE completer is anywhere between 8 and 12. We require 40 courses to graduate. So what we've said, and we prescribe about 30 of those, or sorry, we prescribe about 20 of the other 30, right? So what we've said is your pathway is 25% of your educational experience. And the other 75% is this universal expectation because you must be 75% the same as everyone else and only 25% different. What I hear on this conversation about pathways is there are kids with fundamental differences in passions, interests, aspirations, and skill sets. And it's not 25% different. And so that's where we get in this conversation of what are we willing to give on? What risks are we willing to take so that we don't trap kids? Because the only reason a kid is trapped is because they also have to take this, and this, and this. And so we'll say, I'm going to shove you through something you're not interested in just to get you a useless diploma. Then take a risk and allow you to potentially win, right? I'm going to guarantee a loss rather than create the potential for a win. And I think that's something we have to grapple with. And it's uncomfortable in this space because they're kids and they're human lives, right? And that's why ROI is so critical. And going back to Josh's point around it has to be benchmarked. It can't be when they're 26, which gets to my point around the question that I have. What are those key decisions if we create flexibility along the way? There is no doubt that the college prep math sequence includes algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, and some advanced math. We did a longitudinal analysis, and the only thing that had a greater impact, and it was a negative impact on enrollment or employment 1 year after high school than advanced math, was discipline. And you can imagine that's such a small subset of kids that, yeah, like the few kids who get in trouble don't go to college, or like when I say get in trouble, suspensions and expulsions. The second one was a positive, and it was advanced math, right? So if we have a sophomore that doesn't take geometry in our system, what does that mean? Have we foreclosed 4-year college at that point? If so, that decision point needs to be highlighted by our counselors, our coaches, our families, our employers, and everyone. And so I also want to know who's not taking geometry. Somebody mentioned that in the conversation. We'll know next year when our 9th graders who are in this diploma become 10th graders, I'll know exactly who doesn't take geometry. I'll know where they come from. I'll know what zip code they live in. I'll know their parents' education. I'll know their race. I'll know everything about that child. And there will be some doors that get knocked on. Is there particular something in your water for these particular kids that they don't get geometry in your community? Because we certainly don't want that to happen. And talking about creating crises. So for me, how do we use our data to get those benchmarks in place, Josh? Because when we're just kind of shooting, probably a bad analogy, when we're just kind of guessing, we can unintentionally restrict opportunity because we are naturally averse to risk in this space because it's a social enterprise and it's a human enterprise. And so we want to use data. What are those key benchmarks along the way? If a kid doesn't start a concentrator pathway by the end of 10th grade, Josh, you made it. Is there still an opportunity for them to get it? If not, that's a critical conversation in 10th grade. We got to have it, and then exploration in 8th and 9th grade becomes even more important. So I don't know what those things are. I'm just guessing right now. And so we need to know definitively with data, what are those key benchmarks along the way that are going to foreclose opportunities for kids? And the last point that I make, because I usually get a laugh in this one, is nobody cared when my opportunity to attend Harvard was foreclosed upon me after 1 semester of high school, right? So some opportunities are going to be foreclosed for some kids, right? So let's all grapple and understand that. It's just making sure that all kids have a meaningful opportunity and multiple options as they go throughout, not ensuring that every kid has every option all the way up until the point that they graduate, because that's not real.
That's right. Well, gentlemen, where did the time go? My gosh, we're already through our questions. Thank you all for putting questions into the Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and transition to our our Q&A. Okay, they're putting some questions in for me, and so I will go ahead and read the questions. 10 years ago, we were telling kids they needed to learn code. Now, with AI and other things, we have an oversupply of software developers who have double the unemployment rate of art history majors. Um, so, how do we accurately forecast these H3 jobs in the evolving world? And H3 is usually high wage, high demand, high skill. I see, Josh, you're off mute. I'll let you go.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really like this question because it highlights a big danger here. So I think from a policymaker perspective, often the instinct is to look and see what the H3 jobs are, and then try to move there and kind of build rigid systems around those H3 jobs. Like that's where we need to be. Not understanding that we live in a dynamic job market that changes all the time. And so the where the H3 jobs are will change over time. It absolutely will. And this is a great example of that, coding. So in my state, our previous governor built in a requirement that every student take a computer science class. Every kid needs to learn to code. And it was a graduation requirement. We put in a bunch of teacher training programs, invested a lot of money, and you're absolutely right. It sure seems like it's less valuable now. Now when you code, you're learning a lot of other valuable skills about logic and that are applicable to a lot of other things. But this is the danger that you choose one pathway and then you build some rigid systems around it. I think the way around this is to build a process where you're continually looking and evaluating the return on investment, what the job market looks like, and providing that information to parents and families, school leaders, and to policymakers. We need to normalize the understanding that the job market is ever changing. The job market, even locally, is ever changing based on the mix of employers who are there. And so it is not something where you can just, set it and forget it on the pathways. We can't just decide what the pathways are today and have that be true for 20 years. And so we need to put in place the systems that will update over time.
I'm going to give you Ron in case you want to add. Ron's
There's a lot of
pretty,
questions, so I mean, I could make up an answer for the next 10 minutes, but let's go to the next one.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay. There seems to be a lot of questions around interest versus demand. But so I wanted to acknowledge to all of our attendees that we're seeing those questions. So so they're asking, what is the proposal to help with that mismatch, right, between the student interest and demand? We talked about a little bit earlier with advanced manufacturing.
Yeah, can I jump in, Josh? You mind? So I heard this awesome, going back to our partnerships with the folks on the ground, I heard this awesome kind of just articulation. You said this, Josh, earlier. Students often don't even know what their parents do. They can just name it. And so there has to be a critical investment in career coaching that goes beyond the school facilitating career coaching, that actually brings in experts and exposes students in meaningful ways beyond just a career fair, but a career fair can be a component earlier on so that students kind of see what the work is. But here's what a superintendent said. He said, we invite back the kid who's 19, who's now 10 months into the job with a brand new truck to come talk to the kids about what opportunities exist in their community, because they know what a brand new truck is. And they're willing to sacrifice a little bit of like, do I really want to do right? So it's a multifaceted approach of connecting them, bridging the gap between where they are today and the jobs that exist. Part of that is introducing them to the job. The other part is getting strategic about the use of their peers so they can see the benefits, the material, right? Like, I mean, that's real. I have a car, I pay rent, they might even buy, that's an anomaly. And I'm 20 years old. You know me. You were in 10th grade when I was a senior. We both played football together. And so I think that aspect can really start to shift the conversation around interest. And especially if those people can say, I originally wanted nothing to do with this. And now I enjoy the heck out of my life. And like, I have options even beyond this, but I have an immediate option right after high school because I shifted into something that was in high demand. I thought that was really cool and often something that we don't talk about enough.
And this kind of lines up. We'll do one final question. It says, how do we ensure that the risk we allow students to take about their classes and pathways are not things that make them susceptible to being too specialized? I'll let either one of you take that.
I'll just go quick. There is unbelievable work going on by I think it's Lightcast is who we use to look at our credentials, who are just scanning job postings across the country and collecting the skill-based demands or the skill-based requirements for these jobs and starting to transcend and create databases of the skills that are needed. And when I say needed, they exist on the job postings for these different industries. And what they're seeing is these are the skills that are across the board. And these are the skills that are only appearing in certain industries. And I think that that data is, but go back to Josh, that data is spinning around in the ivoriest of towers with no windows. Okay. And it comes out as a policy from the state of which credentials are valuable. I'm not going to tell you why, I'm not going to tell you how. Trust me, there's a man behind the curtain. Like that work is fascinating because then what that is building is an AI model where they're taking those skills and then translating it into curricula and learning activities for kids that are directly aligned. It's fascinating what's going on in that space. So keep your eye there. When we talk the conversation about skill development and employability skills of the past are fundamentally different conversations that we're having now because of technology and AI.
That's great. Thank you, Ron. I want to thank everyone. I'm going to give both Ron and Josh an opportunity to do a quick closeout, and then we'll turn it back over to Eric. But it's been a fascinating conversation. So, Josh, I'll hand it over to you. Final thoughts.
No, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate everybody showing up and for you all hosting this. I think that I'll close out by just saying that, this is really important work and is not one of those things where there is going to be a right answer, where we're going to come up with the policy that needs to be in place everywhere. So we really need to put in place the processes and the data to start and continue the conversation about what ROI is and how we think about ROI and how we guide students down pathways that will get them to higher ROI for them and for our states. And I think Ron made a great point there at the end. It can't just be we often think you got to be passionate about your job and you got to love your job. I think that's fine. You can be passionate about your job and you love your job. A lot of what we're doing is, can I do the thing and am I going to not hate it? And what does it get me on the other side? And we don't do enough to connect that. And so I think that helping students see that is important too. But this is a conversation and needs to be flexible like a conversation.
Thanks, Josh. Ron, to you.
I will let Josh have it. I defer to Josh's closing there. I thought that was great.
Thank you so much, both of you. And Eric, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. Just really appreciate Josh and Ron for being here. Kim, thank you so much for monitoring. That was a phenomenal discussion. I really got a lot out of it. Hope participants also did. Thank you all for joining us and for the work you do every day for students. When the meeting closes, there's going to be a brief feedback survey that pops up. We'll just ask that you take 60 seconds to complete it. It's also going to be the follow-up email we share this afternoon or tomorrow. Again, really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone, and hopefully see you again.